So we talked about set operation and we talked about join. Basically, these are the operations between different data sets. The other very important data set operation is aggregation. You not only want to discuss, to check how two different data sets can interact together, you also want to see how you can extract useful information from one data set. And this useful information usually involves some statistic capabilities. We discussed about aggregation functions before, but at that time, we only apply the aggregation function to the whole data set, right? We get the sum of all data. The average of all data, minimum, max, count, etc. This describes the statistic characteristics of a data set, of a full data set. However, there's also a need to divide the data set into smaller groups for further research. For example, let's say I'm teaching a course. Of course, I'm teaching here, but the whole program, for the whole program, there might be two or five different DS530 sessions. If you want to compare each student, each course, each session, one to another, then you need to get the average score, average grade in one session versus the average grade in other sessions, right? You want to compare, for example, student evaluation for this session versus the other session versus the whole department, the whole school. Or like weather data, it's basically when you say the national average is 70 degrees, this basically means nothing. You need to tell, oh, it's 90 degree in Miami and 50 degree in Maine. That makes much more sense now, right? Instead of the 70 degree average. And then we have the stock price patterns in one sector versus patterns in another sector. So all these are informations that requires further analysis than just by a general aggregation. And group by helps us with this purpose. Group by, as the name suggests, it will group rows in a data set into subsets by some criteria. Right, so like the chart here show here, you have red data, you have blue data, you have green data. What group by does? It will put all the data by the same color or by the same attribute, indeed, by the same into each group. So this is the first step. You are going to group different data of the same characteristics into different groups, or what we said here is the same processing unit. All the green data goes together, all the blue data goes into another group, and all the red data goes into another group. Then on top of this group by, we're going to perform some statistics over this sub data set, right? The green sub data set, let's say we apply a sum, the sum to the green data set, green sub data set, and then apply the same sum function to the blue sub data set, and apply the same sum function to the red sub data set. So here we are dividing or grouping the original data set into sub data sets and perform the calculation or processing that we want. And when we group, there's always some kind of a characteristics that we want to use. We group by attributes, right? For example, here, visually, of course, we are grouping that by green, blue, and red by color. In reality, in database, you will group them by different data, different attributes. Like if you want to compare the student evaluation of one session to another, of course, you want to get a student session, student evaluation of each session, and aggregate or average, take the average of the evaluation in each session, then compare this to another one, to compare this to average of that particular session to one another. Similarly, when you compare the temperature of city, you want to divide by city or area. Like somewhere in Maine, some in Portland, Maine, you get some You get some temperature, you average them out into the city temperature of Portland, Maine, and then you do the same thing to Miami, Florida, right? So these are the things that you can use to group data, basically by attributes in the data set. Then you perform aggregation. So this shows us two important aspects of a group by statement. You need an attribute or attributes, multiple attributes to group data into different groups. Then you need to use the aggregation function to calculate a result for this group, for each group, each subset. So group by keyword is in the select statement. It's after table selection, after from. Column orders in group by doesn't matter, but the select columns must either be a group by column or aggregated column. So you will have a select group by columns and aggregated columns, then from a table, then group by group, the group by columns. As we said, group by columns, the order doesn't matter. And also aggregation function, the aggregated columns, the order doesn't matter either. You can mix them up. You can put the aggregated columns first. You can put the group by columns later, or just mix them the group by column 1, aggregated column 1, group by column 2, etc., etc. But usually, as again, for other people to read it easier, for easier reading, for easier analysis of your SQL, usually we recommend you to write all the group by columns first, followed by aggregated columns. And also, all the columns, all the group by columns must show up both in select and group by, and preferably in the same order. Technically, you can have different order in select and group by, but this serves no purpose other than confuse yourself, right? And make the code difficult to read. So as we said, you will have a select group by columns or group by attributes and aggregated columns. These are two parts that a group by must have. And then you have the group by clause followed by the group by columns. So example here is a select student name, sum of tuition from registration, and group by student name. So here what we are doing is there are multiple students in this registration table, right? And when we say group by student name, we are dividing this registration data by student name. All the student name, all the rows with the student name 1, like Luke Skywalker, will go to one group. All the data, all the rows with the student name 2, like Leia Skywalker, goes to another group. So you will have, assuming there's only two groups, two different student name in the registration table, then you will have two groups. One group belongs to student name Luke Skywalker. Another group belongs to student name Leia Skywalker, right? Then based on the student name, we can perform a sum of actual tuition, which is the sum of all the actual tuitions in each group. You have a Luke Skywalker sum 280 and Leia Skywalker sum 7,000, assuming princes have more money to pay. Then we mentioned this before, but now we need to, but this is very important. So it was some individual slides to discuss. You have to match select to group by. You have to make sure all columns in select must either be group by or aggregated. Remember in the original syntax I show you, I mentioned there are two groups of columns in select statement. The first is the group by columns, and another is aggregated columns. Your columns in the select must be either one. You cannot have select the column that is not in group by and is not aggregated column. It doesn't work that way. Well, why? Because if you have a non-aggregated columns that is not in group by, then it will give you repeating groups, which won't be first normal form compliant. So SQL does not allow in select columns directly without group by. For example, if you have a student name and student group by student, And you may have some aggregation functions, which is fine. I'm just skipping this from here. But basically now you have a course name. The problem with this is there are multiple, for the same student, each student may have multiple courses, right? So when you do a select student name and course name, you will have multiple student name and course name combination, which means for each student, you will have multiple course name, you will have multiple entries. Now, when you do group by, you are grouping all these student rows into one row, right? Into one group and output one row. The problem is that when you output one row and you have multiple course name, what will happen? You will have a repeating group, which is not first normal form compliant. You are breaking the first normal form of relational algebra. So this is why you cannot do group by. Let's look at, this is so important that let's look at the example and repeat this again. So we will have a select without group by. Again, select the student name and course name. So now that you can see student name, Luke Skywalker, have two courses, right? Now, once you are doing group by, you're grouping this into one group and output will be one row. Remember that when we talk about aggregation function takes a bunch of rows and output one, right? And so in the whole select course, in the select class, you have a group by column, which outputs one value for each group by column, right? For all of two rows of Luke Skywalker, there's only one value of Luke Skywalker. So it's one row. It's a one value. And for every aggregation function, it takes all the input rows and output one value. So both group by column and the student and the aggregation function outputs one, forms one row of output. But now you have multiple courses matching to this group by one group by row. Once you have this mapping, you will have a repeating group of courses against the single row of student name with some aggregation function, right? So this is not first normal form compliant anymore. That's why you have to have anything in select group, select class must either be an aggregation function, which generates only one row for the whole data set, for the whole subset or the whole group, or the output has to be a group by column. Now, it is possible there may not be repeating groups based on data. That's possible, right? If it happens that each student only choose one course, then there's no repeating groups. But this is entire depending on the data. So SQL decided that it's not worth the effort just to identify whether it is possible to have a group by, to have a select without group by. Instead, SQL choose to enforce first normal form by default. So sometimes you look at certain database, you actually can do a select without group by, but this is outside of a normal SQL definition, and which is something you should not do. Now, aggregation functions do not need to be in group by class because these functions will only return one value per group. So it's a first normal form compliant by default. Okay. You can also have multiple columns in the group by in a group by class. It will be the same as a single column group by. You will have all group by columns in group by and in select. And again, no select column should be, or again, all select columns should be either in group by or aggregated. Now, group by is for all value combos. The order is not important. So you can have student name, you can have course, you can have, or you can have course first, followed by student. The order, column order is not important. You can change that. But usually, we recommend you to write it in the same order. Group by columns first, followed by the aggregated columns. And within aggregated group by columns. You follow the same order in both select and group by. That's database has no problem. It can parse no matter how you put it, but it's more for readability. Okay. And then the order in select clause determines the order of display. Right. This is a no-brainer. Then group by on primary key is the same as a normal select. Why? As you can see that if the group by is on the primary key of a table, then each, because it's a because group by is group by unique value, right? So if group by on primary key itself only have one row. Each value of a primary key only corresponding to one row. So group by on primary key means you are grouping one row as a group. In that case, it's the same as a normal select, just you don't need to have an aggregation function anymore. Like the two sequels down here is the same because student name and course name is the primary key combination of registration. So you can select student name, course name. Each time you are only picking one row. And when you do average to, let's say, to one row, what do you get? You get the same value, right? So it's the same. So sometimes you do see people use to, if they want to select the whole table based on primary key, sometimes people use group by, some people don't. In general, I recommend you, if you know it's the primary key, you don't need to use a group by, because group by is expensive. Group by is another layer of operation. It's not really expensive in the sense that it's in the same path. It will be performed in the same path of SQL execution, but still it's an additional work. So if you know you are selecting by primary key, you don't necessarily need to add group by, but there's nothing wrong if you add that group by. And then you can also add order by. I think people, once they see group by, they will think about group order by. The result set of group by can be ordered, right? Order by will be follow group by. So it will be select from group by, order by. Order by is the last one, always the last clause in a select statement. Order by will sort the result set of group by. And remember, because it's a result set, because it's sorting the result set, order by can only use the columns in the result set. You can use any columns in the result set, but if the result set is, if the column is not in the result set, you cannot use it. Even if the column is in the original table, you can, if it's not in the group by, then you cannot order by it. This includes the aggregation function too. Okay, so the group by syntax will be select from, group by, order by. And order by will be the subset of columns in the select clause. This is very important. Subset of columns in the select clause, not the columns from the table. If let's say I have a table with a date column, registration date function, and I'm not grouped by it, and I'm not aggregating by it, then I cannot order by that one.